like a part one and a part two. And chapter 6 is the end of part one. Because part one is character driven, the stories, the kings, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel. And so in Daniel, it is like a prominent figure throughout those chapters. But then the next 6 chapters are a list of more of a prophetic nature, poetry. And while Daniel is very prominent, I mean, because these are visions given to him, it's not so much the stories of, the Daniel in the lion's den, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and the fiery furnace, or, the story about them abstaining from certain types of foods. So these are familiar stories that we know from the book of Daniel, and that's in the first 6 chapters. And so when we look at those stories, because they are so, I don't want to use the word common, but so well known to us, that we sometimes look at them just kind of like, oh, it's Daniel in the lion's den again. Oh, it's the fiery furnace again. We kind of detach the emotions from it because we've heard it so many times. So today we're going to take a look at Daniel in the lion's den. And I encourage you that just take a look at this objectively, with an open mind. Not as if you've heard this story hundreds of times before, but that this is a new story. And this is something that's important to us. So, Daniel chapter 6, starting with verse 1. It's not working, Chad. Mike?
It's that, but it won't pick up your voice at all.
I can hear you. Yelling real loud. So.
Are you yelling?
Yeah, I'm yelling.
Now I know what you sound like when you're mad.
You're right. I was going to say, it's doing something.
It's not reading back here.
Okay. Are there any other mics on?
Nope.
Okay. Testing 1, 2, 3. Just hold it closer to my mouth. Turned it off and turned it back on. That's what they always tell us at work. Did you turn it off? Did you turn it back on? So, all right. I think it was back here. All right. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps that by his exceptional qualities, the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. All right, let's pause there for a second. So we start with this lesson, like this whole section of the lesson. We started with it by saying that Daniel and his 3 friends were kind of like they had won the genetic lottery. I mean, they were good looking, they were smart, they were charismatic. They had all the qualities that the king was looking for when it comes to, being a leader. And
throughout the book, Daniel has also shown that even though he had all of these qualities, he was humble, that it was important for him to maintain his ethics. And so he had humility, he had courage, he used his gifts that God had given him along with the favor God had bestowed upon him, and that kept getting him promoted over and over again. And by the time we get to chapter 6, he is now like just a step below the king and royalty and has one of the most powerful positions in the most powerful nation on the planet. And when we look at this chapter here, some translations of this book actually start chapter 6 with the last verse of the previous chapter, because it ends with Belshazzar being defeated by Darius, and Darius the Mede taking over the kingdom. That actually seemed like a more logical place to start this chapter when we're talking about King Darius and some of his his arrangements of the kingdom, setting up 120 rulers. And so when we look at this section, I'm going to be honest with you, outside the Bible, we don't find this guy. Darius doesn't show up in archaeology at all. So there is evidence that shows a king that conquered Babylon, and his name was Cyrus the king. And the more likely scenario here that we're seeing is that Cyrus was the Persian who ruled over the Persian Mede. It was like a mix of the two, the Persians and the Medes, this empire. And Darius, who most likely that's a nickname given to him by the Jews, was actually probably known as, I'm going to butcher this name, I know I am, Gabaru. And he was a royal figure who was assigned to conquer Babylon. So while he was royalty, he wasn't the top royalty. And this is now later on when we see Ezra and Nehemiah, they talk about a Darius, not the same guy. That's a totally different Darius. So don't get the two of them confused. But they do mention Ezra and Nehemiah who mentions a Darius who ruled later on. So just kind of keep that in mind, that Daniel is probably dealing with the family member, maybe a lower royalty, who was assigned himself to be king over Babylon while the real king was still in charge of the Persian Median Empire. So the Persian Empire was the largest empire at the time. Up to this point in history, no empire had been anywhere near this size. It stretched, if you remember your geology or geography from high school, it stretched from what is now current day India in the east to all the way over into Africa and down below Egypt, all the way down to Libya and Ethiopia. So that is a huge chunk of land for one person to rule. And trying to control that large of a empire was too difficult, which is probably why Darius was in charge of Babylon. And then even among that, he would set up 120 governors to help control the country. And so when Darius shows up and he is starting to establish this rule over Babylon, he hears about Daniel. Daniel's reputation is so powerful that, while he was under Nebuchadnezzar, He had been well known to be, think about it for a moment. How many people in modern times survives the transition from one president to the next? Because their reputation is so good that both sides have to agree, this guy's good at his job. I don't care who's in charge. He's good at this job. Politically speaking, he's very ethical. He doesn't swing. Daniel is not the type of guy who is trying to appease whatever king is in power. He's not a yes man. He is a, this is what you need to do man. And the kings have learned to rely upon him and his knowledge to the point that when a new king is established, one of the first people he picks to put in charge of things is Daniel. Instead of being afraid that he belonged to the old regime and that he might be loyal to them and do something to try to sabotage my rule, they look at Daniel and say, he's an ethical person. I feel comfortable putting him in charge. Not just in charge, but the one step below the king. The king is saying, all right, I've got all these people in charge, and then I've got these people in charge of them, and these people in charge of them, smaller and smaller ground, until you get down to just a handful of people. And who am I going to put in charge of them? Well, let's put Daniel in charge of them. That was the plan. And so Daniel was about to be given oversight of even the high officials, the guys that are way up in the organization, and to help the king rule over the kingdom. So not only has Daniel earned a top spot, but he is already being considered to be promoted to the very top spot right below the king himself. Using these God-given gifts that he has, it's undeniable that he's the perfect choice for this. All right, so how has Daniel proven to be humble throughout this book so far? What are some examples of him being humble? Nobody remembers Daniel being humble? Right? How many times is it not just a king, but kings plural, offered him gifts? And his reaction is, that's not why I'm doing this. You do whatever you want, but I'm just here to deliver a message.
But last week, they went ahead and gave
They gave
him.
it to him, but his attitude was, you can give me whatever you want. You're not going to live long enough to follow through on that. So.
And I see the most humility is he doesn't just give an answer, he takes it before the Lord.
Right.
Saying, I'm the one that has the answer, my God has the answer.
How many times when dealing with a king, when he was not even just the king, but the guy that was in charge of his group, that he said, give me an opportunity. He didn't come out and say, I know better than you do that if we do it this way, we're going to be smarter, we're going to be healthier. No, he said, give me the opportunity before the king. Give me the opportunity to go before my God and ask.
He was never arrogant.
No, he wasn't. And who did he always, every time, where did he say that this information come from? Yeah, this comes from my God. If I don't go talk to my God about it, then you're not going to get a good answer. I don't blame you for not trusting those other guys, because they're claiming to be smart enough to have the answers. I'm not that smart, but my God is. That was always his attitude. I'm really not that great. I'm not that smart. I'm not that good. I'm nothing without my God. So give me the opportunity to go talk to my God about it. And so, yeah, every time he did that. Why can't leaders today have that kind of humility? We have just the opposite problem in America, that we darn near worship people who are arrogant. And the more arrogant they are, the more we want to, hey, our guy's confident. Confidently ignorant. I just don't get it. There is a principle that I quote often, It's called the Peter's Principle. And it talks about being promoted to your highest level of incompetence. And it sounds kind of funny at first, but when you actually know the principle is that you can do a certain job. And people who are ignorant don't know what their limit is. And they will keep going and keep going and keep going. And because nobody else is applying themselves or applying for that job, they'll get promoted to the point that they really can't do the job anymore. Because that's the highest level of their incompetence. They reach that level of incompetence. Meanwhile, the person who is knowledgeable doesn't apply for those positions, doesn't push themselves, because in their mind, they know what the job is going to take, and they don't feel qualified to do it. So people who are not qualified frequently get promoted because they're too ignorant to know that they aren't qualified for the job. If that doesn't describe politics to me, I don't know what does.
And you can't say that I'm a godly person, I'm a Christian, and not walk like one and talk like one.
Right,
And Daniel did.
right. And that's why he frequently caught the eye of whatever leader was in charge, because he boldly stated, I don't know. I don't know, but give me the opportunity to have a conversation with my God so that I can get the answer for you. I would love for a politician for once to say, I don't know. But they're too arrogant to do that. And we keep voting them in.
Back in the Old Testament, like when they went to war without consulting with God, they didn't win.
No.
But when they consulted with God, they won every time.
Yes. I mean, and so Daniel is, and that's one of the great things about especially these first 6 chapters, is because it does highlight that in a time of Israel's exile, when their nation is in shambles, there is no temple for them to worship in, there's no altar to perform sacrifices in, you still find these people who have held on to their beliefs so ardently, so strongly, that they're willing to stand up before these men in charge and say, whoa, wait a second. It may cost me my life, but let's stop for a moment. Let's stop this ridiculousness for a moment. We need more people like that. All right, let's take a look at verse 4. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel and his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy, neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man, Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God. So the administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, O king Darius, live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce decree that anyone who prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, O king, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the laws of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be replaced. So King Darius put the decree in writing. All right, so the corrupt officials looking for some wrongdoing against Daniel soon realized that their only option was to turn his greatest strength against him. It was actually a very smart plan. They knew that there was not going to be an opportunity to sling mud, as we call it today. There was no dirty laundry to air with Daniel. They weren't going to accomplish it that way. And the Bible, I mean, we find it even in other books and Chronicles and Ezra, that during this time that the Persian kings allowed for the freedom of religion. They allowed the Israelites to go back and rebuild their temple, actually paid for them to go back and rebuild their temple. So they believed in allowing the people to worship their gods. It's a little unusual, though, in this whole scenario, that Darius would even be concerned about what Daniel's doing as far as worship, until these guys come along and they convince the king, out of their jealousy of Daniel, because he's getting ready to be placed as leader over all of them, they come up with this devious scheme to end Daniel by using his faith against him. And they saw this as a weakness they could exploit, but in all fact, it was one of Daniel's biggest strengths, that they couldn't find anything because of his beliefs. They couldn't find anything against him. They couldn't find that he was unethical. They find his dedication to God to be kind of a little odd and weird, so let's exploit that. And it was strange that a Persian king would build something or set up a rule like this, that they themselves would be worshipped. Because they were not like the Egyptians or the Romans or even Alexander the Great, who all saw themselves as a deity. They did not. They did not see themselves as any form of God. They thought it was kind of weird that other kings did so. So it's actually kind of an unusual side note that this king would do something like this. Most scholars, well, I'm not going to say most, a lot of scholars, the ones that I think sound more reasonable to me, instead of just accepting it at face value that he's setting it up, that he's a god, because that's not their society at all. It's more likely that he envisioned himself as an intercessor, that he is the one that is taking these prayers to their God. And so he's seeing himself more like a royal priest. And his goal, most likely, was to unite these newly conquered countries under this one kingdom. So as a way of doing so, bring your prayers to me and I'll intercede for you. And the reason I bring this up is because it's real easy sometimes for us to not pay attention to somebody's motives. He thought he was doing it for the right reasons. He true in his heart. This isn't like Nebuchadnezzar. This isn't like Belshazzar, who were so arrogant that they demanded people to worship their idols. They threw these lavish parties and used the special instruments of the temple as party favors. He's not that arrogant like they were. But he is being deceived. He's being manipulated because he's not thinking ahead. He, in his mind, says, that's a great plan. I can unite these people. I can break up some of that dissension that we have, and I can unite them by doing this. So he's thinking this is a wonderful plan, not because they're worshiping him, but because he's trying to build a nation. All right, let's take a look at verse 10. Now when Daniel learned the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs rooms where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about the royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days anyone who prays to any god or man except you, O king, would be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, The decree stands in accordance with the laws of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. They said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the decree that you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. All right, let's pause there. So although the king's ruling put Daniel in danger, it didn't stop Daniel. He was unmoved. He was unshaken by it. His faith, his daily routine stayed the same. But the high-ranking officials that had set this up, they didn't have that peace. They didn't have that security that Daniel felt. And they felt a little smug because Daniel walked right into the trap that they had set for him. And instead, they were, instead of feeling confident in it or assured of their positions because they were in high positions as well, they behaved like children, going and tattling on Daniel. Hey, king, do you know what Daniel's doing? I mean, just like a bunch of children tattling. There was no Jewish law that demanded that Daniel pray 3 times a day facing Jerusalem. That wasn't a Jewish law. But King Solomon had mentioned doing so during the dedication of the temple. So he mentioned facing the temple and praying. But it wasn't a law. This was just Daniel's practice. This was his habit. And so he wasn't making some kind of extravagant show of it. This is just his devotion. He simply continued just as he had always done. And they made a big show of accusing Daniel before the king. Hey, do you know what Daniel's doing? But Daniel did not react to them or deny the allegation. He didn't try to defend himself. He just continued to do what Daniel does every day. He prays. Instead of arguing the injustice of the new law, Daniel simply kept praying. Why do you think he reacted this way? Why did he have confidence in his God? I was going to say, how many kings has he survived now?
He's consistent.
Yeah.
That reminds me, those guys remind me of the Sadducees and Pharisees.
Right. Oh, 100%. They do. I mean, and they're not, there's been other people like that, but this whole story kind of is a bridge because it also reminds me going the other direction of the younger brother who gets a pretty coat from his father, and his brothers start making up schemes and plans to get rid of him. And what winds up happening to him? What they intended for evil, God used for good. So to me, this is a very, not just Jesus and the Sadducees and Pharisees in the New Testament, but also going back the other direction to Joseph. This story is one that is repeated throughout the Bible of indicating that, people have plans. They make these schemes and these plans to try to destroy God's plan. And when their plans come in direct confrontation with God's plans, their plans fail.
Like Saul trying to kill him.
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, he didn't react to them in an outrageous way. He behaved the same way he did with Nebuchadnezzar and with Belshazzar before. He's going to continue. And just like, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, my God can, he can. But if he chooses not to, it doesn't change my reaction. I am consistent regardless of what the king says or does. I am consistent with my God. So it's a very, very important point to note that Daniel didn't overreact. He didn't underreact. Daniel just did the same thing he did every day. King can make whatever rule he wants about who I have to worship, but I know why my nation was destroyed. And that is not a point that's lost on me. I'm not going to change my mind about what I do now. So he's a very steady individual. All right, verse 14. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to the king and said to him, "Remember, O king, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve, continually rescue you." As a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the ring of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. Quick decisions often lead to regret, especially when we begin to experience the consequences of that. Clearly, Darius was fond of Daniel. And that's why I truly do believe this is a different situation than Daniel had faced before with the other kings, because he really does seem to be fond of Daniel. He's grown, a lot of respect for Daniel, placing him in positions of high levels and getting ready to put him in charge of all the other officials. But that doesn't mean he was able to reverse his decree and save David's life. He couldn't do it. So Daniel was the one headed to the lion's den. But if you really look at the situation, the story here, the story is actually focused on the king. It's called Daniel in the lion's den, but this story speaks very little about Daniel. He says very few words throughout this whole thing. It is really the story about Darius. The whole focus of chapter 6 is on the king, not Daniel. So we really need to remember that when we're looking at this, because the king he's upset about this. He is sorrowful. He regrets making this decision. He is searching for ways to, he's going through the laws, trying to find ways to overturn this. But, that evening, the conspirators return, and they force Darius, once again, focusing on Darius and not Daniel, they forced Darius to follow through with his decree. And when Daniel was arrested, once again, we see the story coming from Darius. He's the one expressing the hope. He's the one saying, your God, hopefully your God will rescue you this time as well. And when Daniel's arrested, he doesn't say anything. He is thrown into the lion's den. No comment from Daniel. We see Darius taking all the action, putting the stone on there, putting the seal on the stone that's placed over the entrance. And then at this point, we would think that, if Daniel is the main focus of the story, then the story would follow Daniel into the lion's den. No, who does it follow? Darius. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't eat, didn't even bother with trying to distract himself with entertainment. It's focusing on Darius. He was so upset about this situation that he was troubled all night long. We don't know what Daniel's doing at this point because he's behind a stone. It's all from the perspective of Darius. We're following him through this story. And although he is not innocent in this situation, the author is very clear about presenting the king as having a lot of respect for Daniel and regretting his actions, being caught up in this manipulation from these other guys, and he still has faith in God to intervene. He's not innocent. He's not guilt-free in this situation, but we see that he is a man that is concerned about Daniel. He is a man.
See it, think it through. I think he just didn't think it through.
No, he didn't.
Rather than coming.
No, that's what I'm saying. I truly do believe, based off of his reaction when he found out the unintended consequence, he truly did have good intentions for doing this. For him, he was persuaded by these guys he had placed in charge to advise him that this was going to be a good plan. And he believed them. So, yeah, not everything is black and white. Darius isn't the bad guy in this story. Did he make mistakes? Absolutely he did. He made mistakes. Was he completely guilt-free? No, he was not guilt-free. So, good people can make bad choices. And I don't think Darius is inherently a bad guy. He had hope that Daniel would survive. Daniel had faith. There's a difference. Darius hoped things would work out for the good. Daniel had faith in his God. I don't care if it goes for the good or not. It doesn't bother me. All right, chapter 6, verse 19. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm here, king. Live forever, king. You know. So our ultimate hope lives beyond this world. But we shouldn't forget that God cares about our lives that we live here and now. And he often intervenes for his children when they turn to him and ask for prayer, as the story in Daniel proves. And Darius, his anxiety for Daniel caused him to rush to the lion's den. That's, to me, is he's a king. And he's rushing to the lion's den as early as he possibly could the next day, because he was concerned. And the fact that he called out to Daniel displays that he had some level of faith. He had hope that Daniel was still alive, and that there was at least a chance God had miraculously saved Daniel. And verses 21 and 22 contains the only words that is attributed to Daniel speaking throughout this whole chapter here. And he is just basically confirming that God found him innocent. Live long, king. God found me innocent. And then he gets out of the lion's den. And much like with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, where there wasn't any smell of smoke on their clothes, wasn't a single scratch on Daniel. His clothes were fine. The lions, didn't try to harm him at all. And he walks out of there completely unharmed. He was 80 years old at this point. There was no fighting the lions. He wasn't going to overpower them or outmaneuver them. And he says an angel came and shut their mouths. He had supernatural deliverance. And that, sometimes we do have to acknowledge that, yes, we believe that God can deliver us from things like this. But we also need to know that people do die for their faith. It is a strong possibility. Acts chapter 12, we see the martyrdom of James. But then at the same time, in that same chapter, we see the deliverance of Peter. In the same chapter, we see James being killed, Peter being delivered. We don't understand the whys, why Peter was rescued, but James wasn't. And we probably will never know the reasons why sometimes a person is delivered and sometimes they aren't. But much like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, my God can. But even if he chooses not to, that doesn't change my faith in my God. Yes.
Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever." The king's not Jewish, obviously.
Right.
So, do you think there was a possibility that because of the king and Daniel love for the king, basically, he hoped that the king would make it to heaven?
I mean, it's a possibility. And even at this point, I agree with you that he has respect for the king. There apparently is a close relationship between the two of them because based off of the king's reaction, not even necessarily Daniel's response, but just the king's reaction. Apparently there's a strong working relationship definitely between them because he keeps promoting him. That's going to put them in a close proximity quite frequently. So I think they had a legit friendship between the two of them. So I believe, one, that this is another one of those euphemisms where it's a phrase of respect. Live forever, king, kind of respect. But do I believe that Daniel's hoping for a convert? Yeah, I do, because he's tried it multiple times before with kings and kind of failed. They don't listen to him. Hopefully this one will see, and at 80 years old, there's a real good chance Daniel's kind of a father figure. He holds that respect as an older person, wise person, and the king respects that. He sees that and respects it a lot.
It says multiple times in the Old Testament that someone was saved in his own household.
Yes.
So there's a possibility, as I
Yeah.
said, there was that type of relationship.
Yeah. I don't say that it wasn't part of it. Yeah, it's a possibility. All right, let's take a look at 24 here, verse 24 real quick. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations of men of every language throughout the land, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the King of Daniel, for he is the living God and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in heavens and on earth. And he rescued Daniel from his power of the lions, so Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian."
Like he was on board to me.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think that Daniel is hoping for a convert here, and Darius definitely has taken some action to go that way. And after this miraculous deliverance from the lion's den, the king has a very harsh reaction in taking all the people who tattled on Daniel, taking them and their family and throwing them into the lion's den. And to show that it wasn't because the lions were full or weak or just too sick to attack Daniel, before they hit the floor, it says these people were killed. They were starving and attacked these people. Modern readers may feel a sense of injustice regarding the fact that the family of these accusers were also killed. I don't have all the answers. I'll be honest with you that sometimes there are legitimate questions that we wrestle with and have no answers in the text about it. The punishment extending to the entire families was normal for the Persians. That was not uncommon. you did something so terrible that the king was going to punish you, it was going to be on your entire family, which was a deterrent for people to do something like that. Yeah, it's going to kill all of your children so that there's not going to be anybody to talk about you later. You're gone. We don't even know the names of these people. They're stories in the Bible, but we don't know who they are. They don't even get mentioned by name, and there was nobody in their family to survive after them to even talk about them anymore. They're basically effectively removed from history. So we see good guys and bad guys. We like to think of it as good guys and bad guys, but in a lot of cases, much like with Darius here, it's good guys with some rough edges. And Darius was one of those guys. And that's one of the things we can take away from this, is that we would like to think of it as black and white, but even in our own lives, we know it's not. We'd like to do good. Paul said, I would love to do all the great things, but every time I think about doing good things, all those bad things keep coming back. So Darius and Daniel is a great example of a fallible person, somebody who makes mistakes. But God himself, regardless of our failed attempts and our bad choices, still accomplishes his plan. He knows our heart. All right, join with me in prayer. Lord, I thank you so much for this day. I thank you so much for this lesson. And I pray, Father, that you do help us continually to seek out the opportunities to do good in this world. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.